Three stories, three cultures, a critique from multiculturalism. Interest is going beyond the study of literature as literature. Long ago, literature has been appreciated for its intrinsic value as a masterpiece. However, from the merging of different approaches to cultural studies, this vision has changed. Among its various approaches, multiculturalism allows an opportunity for people who have traditionally been shut out, thus displacing a cultural paradigm of representation. This is exactly what Louise Edrich in the show, Sandra Cisneros in Woman Holler in Greek, and Gigi Jen in Who's Irish do. These three stories represent a subaltern culture within a dominant American culture through a specific writing style. Each of these stories depicts a different culture besides the American, which historically has been dominant. Following Dovey in her book Theory into Practice, multiculturalism seeks to identify and analyze literature that represents different identities and cultures further than the dominant one, thus allowing both them to reclaim and reform their culture and people to be more aware of the diversity. Here, what I refer to as culture is the sum of beliefs, institutions, arts, and behaviors of a particular people or time. Then, what culture is being represented in each story? The shawl. In this story, we encounter an indigenous community living at the margins of the American society, what helps them to conserve the traditions until government's interference, when it all went sir, says one character. So, to understand this culture, I propose 4 categories: territory, relationality, subjectivity, and clothing. Firstly, they live on a reservation, a place that has a specific geographic landscape, as you can read on the description. So here, it is noted the close relation to nature and yet an old mother organization, which was changed due to the government. It is nature's object that work as reference points, both metaphorically, as you can read, brought the new baby out of the trees that autumn, and literally, who live across the lake. Secondly, relationality, which can be understood by some subcategories. First, human. The family structure seems to partially resemble the avunculate, in which a special relationship exists between an uncle and his sister children. For when the husband calls the other man uncle instead of calling the other man himself or his father. Also, it can be said that the siblings' relationship is very important, by the way Anakawa's son feels when losing his sister is still when older, or his kids' relationship. Because we learn to survive together during drinking years, we have always been close. It is also barely mentioned the Viking birds gathering. Second, not human. They also related to animals in a non-occidental way. They treat wolves as if they had their own agency, and said that the wolves were bold and had abandoned the old agreement between them and the first human. And last one, spirituality. They related to the spirits, the money dog in this case, by its visits, though it is barely mentioned. The subjectivity constructed by this community is based on kindness. The Git and Iwashbi, the old Ojiba, used to be kind beyond kindness and would do anything for others. And finally, it could be said that the shawls are an important piece of clothing for this community, as the son exhorts the father to send it off to clothe her spirits. Woman Hollering Creek. This story is about a Mexican woman that after marrying moves to Texas. Despite this change, her own cultural identity does not seem to be affected, as she doesn't even know the language. So this story can be understood from 4 categories: family, environment, cultural devices, and cultural images. With this story, we come to realize that the Mexican family tends to be really large, composed in this case by the protagonist, 6 good-for-nothing brothers and 1 old man, the father. Though Clofilas lost her mother, as Sheila says, mothers are very important in Mexican culture, even more in the daughter's wedding. In contrast to her father, what with a father with a head like a burro. Despite this, the father shows how loyal and unconditional family is by telling her after the wedding that I am your father, I will never abandon you. But at the same time, this evidences a patriarchal family system in which daughters are father responsibility and then husband responsibility. As Cleophila states, the towns are so that you have to depend on husband. Under this system, Cleophila carries a lot of responsibility in the marriage institution, raise kids and serve her husband, enduring domestic violence. She has to remind herself what she loves him when she changes the baby pampers, a situation that is also reinforced by the idea that passion is the purest crystalline essence transmitted by telenovelas. The second idea is the environment, specifically the neighborhood, as Cleophila refers to it, the town of gossip, which meets the Latin American stereotypes of the vecina chismosa. Thirdly, cultural devices. We have telenovela, of which Cleophila talks about a lot in the story. It translates as a soap opera, and it is a TV show very popular in Mexico that, besides entertaining, transmits some idea of how society should work, as the romantic idea of love referred above. Mariachi also. Though it is barely mentioned, it is well known that it is a very important Mexican musical tradition. And the last one, cultural images. One of the most important is the Virgin. As Felix says, nothing around here is named after a woman. Really, unless she's the Virgin. I guess you're only famous if you're the Virgin. And it is because Mexico is a strongly Catholic country, historically entrusted to the Virgin of Guadalupe. It is also mentioned La Llorona as a possible reason for the Greek name. It is a Hispanic myth of the soul of a woman who cries for having drowned her kids. Who's Irish? Finally, in this gem story, it gets harder to define one single culture in the story, since it is about a Chinese woman living in the USA with an Irish family. Therefore, along the text, we have to see these identities that results in a hybrid identity. To understand this, it is needed to identify the Chinese aspects that the protagonists convey, which usually are contrasts with American or Irish. She values hard work because, she says, I am work hard my whole life. Here she points out Beth, his son's love mother, had an important job, but criticizes the fact that any of his sons have a job. Every one of them is on welfare. As an old generation, she may have lived the time when Confucianism was the dominant moral and religious system of China. For that reason, she begins, Confucius says a filial son, etc. She says this when American gang members talk about their mothers without really knowing them. The traditional Chinese food is always key to her cultural identity, as with her husband, she had a restaurant when they arrived to the USA. Here, she compares it with the Irish food and thinking, and says, plain bold food, plain bold thinking. Compare this last one to Chinese that according to her are nice and happy people. Every time she refers to her age, she mentions the Chinese aging, in which one born being 1 year old. Chinese age almost 17, says she. But when she refers differently to Sophie's age, Sophie is 3 years old American age. The relationship mother-daughter is also different from China to American. In China, daughter take care of mother. Here it is the other way around. Mother help daughter. Therefore, when Beth will have wished to have woman company, the grandmother says, Chinese people don't think a daughter is so great. In comparison to Irish, Chinese people do not have value so much the world. Beth say, where I come from, people mean for you to move in when they said a thing like that. The child upbringing also differs. While she is used to spank the baby, in American they better use words. While The American babysitter encouraged the baby's nudity. The grandmother says that is a wild behavior, which comes from her Irish side. Though some of these cultural differences are difficult to assimilate for the grandmother, reason why her daughter kicked her out of the house, she is able to assimilate some other to the point where Beth considers hers to be the honorary Irish.